Tonight's session actually is very important. The last workshop that we had, I talked about wisdom and more specifically self-wisdom. From there, I broke self-wisdom down into basically 4 parts. 1 is a topic of perceptions. 2 is a topic of emotions. 3 is about the subconscious. And 4 is about something called the ego self. Tonight, with the developing awareness of your perceptual layers and the power of clarity, this is about perceptions. And this is really just the beginning on the topic of perceptions, but it's a necessary one if we want to advance our understanding and talk about even more complex or complicated ideas. So let's start off by trying to define what a perception is. So the way I see a perception is basically an aspect of how you interpret your reality or this reality. You can also think of a perception as just an idea. So let's start off with a riddle. Let's see how quickly you can figure out the answer to this riddle, because it's a really fun way to explore our perceptions. So imagine an object, and this is the riddle, trying to figure out what this object is. An object that is like a sphere, spherical in shape. And it is red. When you feel it, it's solid, but there's a little bit of a give to it. And as you look at it, it's about the size of my fist. So it's not really huge, it's pretty small. So you decide to try to bite into it to see how hard this object really is. And you get this really interesting crunch sound. And you even get a pleasant smell. And you're chewing on this piece that you chewed off. And inside this red sphere is a yellowish, fleshy material. Okay, what is this object? Who wants to guess? Yes?
An apple.
An apple, very good. Okay. So how many people did not get the apple? All right, it's really interesting. It's really a fun test. Right? Okay, some people online got it. So it's, now that you know it's an apple, then I almost gave away the answer as I was saying it, by the way. I said, and then I said object because I had to correct myself. But so what's really interesting is that when we think about an apple, this perception of an apple, it's associated with many other perceptions, like the color of red, the way it sounds when you bite into it, the taste. Say I didn't mention, but it's like a sweet taste, and it's maybe moist, so it's watery. And when we think about that, it's actually, apple is very, very complicated, because the idea is associated with many other ideas, which we are calling perceptions. Some perceptions are more basic, they're simpler, and some are more complicated. We can look at the apple as pretty complicated already. But the basic perceptions that we know of would be what I call sense perceptions. And these are ideas based on the information given to us by our sense organs, like our ability to touch and feel, our ability to taste and see and smell and hear. These form the primary basic perceptions, which I call sense perceptions. Now, what's really interesting is that the early sense perceptions that we have already form when we are babies in the womb. So for example, medicine science will say that approximately 27 weeks into pregnancy, a baby already opens his eyes and can see for the first time. So if there's light on the belly, it goes through to some extent, and the baby can see the color of red. It may start to make out certain shapes, for example. But before then, actually the baby already developed a sense of touch, can already smell and taste, right? It might not taste so good to us now, but back then the baby doesn't know anything else, so taste is just taste. And it can already hear, which is really amazing because we're already forming these perceptions about our reality in the womb. So those are basic perceptions, and there are other kinds of basic perceptions, some of which we will talk about tonight. So I'm going to bring in this idea of perceptual layer because these sense perceptions are very good at describing tangible objects that we can see and touch and taste. A perceptual layer, if you will, think of it like this, is an apple, is an idea that will consist of other ideas. So think of it as a second tier perceptual layer. In the first layer of your perceptions would be those sense perceptions that I just spoke about. And this makes it convenient. So for example, because we associate different attributes to the idea of an apple, when we talk about apple, you automatically know what it is. You don't have to think about it in terms of the taste, the shape, the color. You automatically know what it is. So it's really fascinating how our minds work. And this aspect of the perceptual layer we're going to use it in different ways and explore it in different ways tonight. It becomes a very, very powerful tool as we bring in more ideas. So we're going to take our official 5-minute break now. And the purpose of this break is, I'll then go and use it in a wet restroom, is for you to think about a perceptual layer that is an object. And just see how your mind thinks about it, how it rationalizes this perceptual layer in terms of the sense perceptions and maybe some other kind of perceptions. Okay, so we'll give you about 5 minutes and then we will resume. Okay, if anyone have any questions, it's a good time to ask. It can be anything that I talked about tonight. It can be about Shaolin in general. It could be about the meditation posture or technique. And again, on Zoom, feel free to type in any questions that you might have. Okay, if no questions, I will come back and I'll check. Oh, I think Hugo is going to has a question for me there. While we're on this break, I do encourage you to stand up, walk around, because the next session will be a 20-minute meditation session. So if you're not used to meditating like I am, you'll get numb very, very fast. Okay, so someone on Zoom asked me the question, what is the benefit? Is that right? The benefit of meditation for me personally. So the way I'll answer it, because the understanding of meditation may be a little bit different. This is a perceptual layer. The idea of meditation is already a perceptual layer. So my experience with it may be very different to other people. So my general answer to that question is that meditation helps me to be more aware of myself. And because the topic tonight happens to be about perceptions, helps me to stay more grounded because I'm always thinking about what my perceptions are and how my mind is thinking. How is it deriving at certain conclusions? This makes me less reactive. So people who know me generally will see that I'm not that reactive. I'm not that emotional. I do have my times, but I'm not. And generally, I prefer being very positive and feeling happy and not feeling negative emotions. And the way to stay on top of all this is the constant practice of meditation. It's worth saying that life is tough. Life is busy. There are so many things going on. There are so many challenges. It doesn't matter if you're a teenager, a young adult, a senior, 80 years old. It doesn't really matter. Life is so difficult. There are so many things going on. When we are busy, we're not paying attention to ourselves. So meditation helps me to stay grounded in this way. I'm always paying attention to myself. How am I reacting to certain things? Is it okay the way that I react? How do I interpret something, which is how do I perceive something? Is it okay? Is that still valid? Maybe I want to update the way I perceive something. But if you don't meditate, you don't give that time to yourself to reset, you probably won't be asking these questions. So instead what happens is that you're constantly reacting to your environment. You never have time to think about your perceptual layers and your thoughts. I think I have another question. How can you use meditation to go into an altered state of consciousness? It's really interesting because altered state of consciousness. So those are actually loaded words, and you will have different authors talking about it with books and online. For myself, I tend not to think about those things. I don't give energy to such a perceptual layer because for me it's meaningless. Now, I'm not saying it's meaningless to you, and you may have good reason why that is important to you. But for me, any idea of some kind of alternate consciousness, there's no importance of that for me. So I don't spend my energy thinking about it. Okay, so with that answers your questions. Yes, Andre?
Can I just ask, going back to what you were saying about the kind of emotions you have, is it that you don't have emotions on the negative end of the spectrum, or do you sort of catch it and decide not to have it?
Yeah, of course I have emotions because I'm a human being.
Yeah,
But that question is better answered in the next workshop, which will be all about emotions. That is the second part of the self-wisdom, 2 of 4 parts. And it's worth spending time as we are doing right now with perceptions, because I will refer back to perceptions and even the relationship between perceptions and emotions. So yes, I have emotions, but I'm very good at knowing how to understand them and how to deal with them.
Does like, dislike, good and bad come to that layers of...
Yes, we will talk about it in a moment. Well, that is a very good thought. It means you're thinking in the right way. So what we're going to do now is go into a 20-minute session. It's a lot tougher. 20 minutes is a long time. So again, if you feel tired, take a nap. You can always resume. If you start snoring, we will wake you up. Don't worry. So in the context of what we're talking about tonight, a thought is, the idea of thoughts is also a perceptual layer. So what we're trying to do is
Like the concept, right? Something.
the construct. I will make reference to some other teachings that are a little bit more formal, that maybe people who are studied, that are more well-read, to bring in some relevance. So was this?
It's not the mainstream topic of today, right?
Well, okay. So just for people online, Igor is asking about the idea of thoughts, and is it a topic of tonight? And the answer is partially it is, because we're talking about perceptions. It is related to thoughts, but a lot of times thoughts arise from our subconscious. And it may also arise out of stress and anxiety and anything that is on your bucket list of things you have to worry about. So in that respect, no. That one will be more adequately addressed when we talk about the subconscious, which would be about 5 or 6 months, something like that. So I'm taking it one step at a time. Perceptions, next one will be emotions, and then the subconscious. And then finally we can talk about the ego self. So these are the 4 primary areas of what I call self-wisdom. When you go through and understand all these, at least at the basic level, then more or less you can solve any problem that you have as a result. And then there will be future talks that will explore these ideas even further. So I've only done a lot of this only at the Shaolin meditation retreat in the summer. And a lot of people could not go, so they're always upset. Say, oh, Dao, I'm not available Wednesday to Friday, I have to work. Or I'm not living in Toronto. So instead of being able to only talk about these things at the retreat, which was a 3-day retreat, I've decided to finally make it available online. But I've had to put a lot of thought about it and how to do it so that people don't misinterpret, so that people don't end up with mental illness, which could happen if I'm not careful. Some of these topics are pretty deep in the sense that it will challenge a lot of things that you maybe even believe in, and the way that you think, and the ideas that you have, so that you will ultimately develop a more clear mind, which is what tonight is about. Okay, I'm going to take a quick washroom break, and I'll come back and answer Stephen's question there, which I'll tell you guys what it is. Wow, okay, I've actually held mine. Okay, about a minute to go. So Stephen had a question. He says that, will I explore the relationship between perceptual layers and reacting too quickly to what is around us? Is meditation about helping us to react more positively or not reacting impulsively? So your last question, the short answer is yes. Because when we are able to better understand and rationalize the perceptual layers that we have, then you can start to separate that and how you react. Before, it would have been more of like a black box, an idea with a black box, and then you would react to it. But when you work on your perceptual layers, then it's not a black box. You can quickly see, oh, I believe in this, and this is why. Okay, and then if your environment, your experience with your environment, maybe somebody says something and brings up that perceptual layer, instead of maybe they insulted you, instead of, getting angry at somebody, you'll be able to more easily anyway get an idea what their perceptual layer looks like on the same topic. And then instead of maybe being angry at the person, you may suddenly find yourself calmly explaining and trying to bridge the gap of the same perceptual layer with the same name, but different information or perceptual layers associated with it. It is a very, very powerful way to look at it. But more specifically, I will address this quite a bit when we talk about emotions in the next workshop. Okay, very good. So we're gonna continue. So I mentioned this as we're talking about the apple perceptual layer. I was talking about as a second level, and your sense perceptions would be the first level. Actually, the idea of apples is a third tier. Can anyone guess what the second tier below that and right above the sense perceptions are? So the idea of apples, and there's something in between. What is that? Yes, Andre? No, something closer. Food is actually the opposite way.
Oh.
Because now apples is part of food, and food includes meals and other kinds like dessert and main courses and things like that. So the other way, I think a little bit more small. What's smaller than apples? The idea of apples. Anyone want to guess? Anybody on Zoom want to guess? Okay, so that would be a type of apple. So put in perspective, if you've never had an apple before, so apple would be singular, then it would be a second layer. When you, let's say you only encountered a red delicious apple, that's the only apple we've ever known. Right? So apple to you is a red delicious apple. It's the same thing. But once you gain the experience, maybe you try a Macintosh apple. Right? So no longer can you call it an apple if you want to be clear about something. It's a Macintosh apple. And then now you have red delicious apple and Macintosh apple, which together forms apple. So now you have a rising complexity of perceptual layers. Now, in a sense, this is nothing new to you. It's just that maybe you never thought about the information in your brain in this way, is all. If we continue going towards the path of food, another layer above apples would be fruits. Right? You have apples, oranges, pineapples. Okay, so you have fruits. Another layer on top of that could be tasty fruits. All right, it's a good one. Oh, tasty fruit brings you're thinking all sorts of delicious fruits. And on top of that could be food. Okay? There's unlimited. You can think of it in many, many different ways. It's amazing how our brain associates all these things. But I'm going to bring back that tasty fruit in a moment. All right? There was a reason why I mentioned that. There is another kind of perceptual layer that Igor brought up, and I call it evaluative perceptual layer. An evaluative perceptual layer is one that is based on a judgment. So you're evaluating, you're comparing at least two things here. When you're doing so, actually there's different levels of perceptual layers, just like we talked about objects. We said there are basic sense perceptions, and there's more complex perceptual layers on top of that. Same thing with evaluative perceptual layers. At the most basic idea of evaluative perceptual layer, that would be things like good and bad, better or worse, hotter or colder, rougher or smoother. These are ways that we are learned to use to compare things. And arising out of that can then be very complicated judgments. So I wrote down a few, so I'm just going to mention some of them. For example, okay, let's start an easy one. Okay, so one of your judgments might be red delicious apples or more tasty than Macintosh apples. Okay, one half of the room may say yes, another half of the room may say no, and that's how wars fight. That's how the wars begin. If people are fighting, because they disagree on the same idea. Okay, but they evaluate it differently. So how can that be? I've had a Macintosh apple. You're crazy. And red delicious is way better. But then someone, no, I like sour. I prefer sour over sweet. So for me, Macintosh apples are better. Are more tasty to me. We're extremely flexible in the way that we think. So I'm going to give you some more examples. And some of them are maybe not as obvious or a little bit even more confusing. So for example, someone may say, or you may think, that eating apples is healthy. Some other people might say eating apples is healthier than eating junk food. Now, it's possible everybody agrees with this, but maybe somebody doesn't agree necessarily. Maybe it depends on a certain situation. I promised to bring back the idea of apples being tasty. The reason why it's relevant is, say, for example, let's go to a supermarket. And for you, you find apples are tasty. So automatically, when you go grocery shopping for fruits, you're considering apples. If you think that apples are not tasty, you automatically exclude it. You don't even think about it. Forget it. I ain't even look at apples. I don't really care about the price. The kind of apple, it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna go for oranges because I think oranges are tasty. We can make very, very fast judgments in this way because we've learned from experience. And that's the key. What makes evaluative perceptual layers so interesting is that it's all based on experience. You have to experience it. So in other words, if you have never tasted enough foods to determine what's tasty and what's not, even the idea of tasty would not exist. You have to have tasted something bitter or something you don't like. Some people love bitter, by the way. So you have to experience something that is untasty, maybe tasteless or inedible, something like that. Then the idea, perceptual layer of tasty can exist. Okay? This is a very important concept, and this is a lot of teaching of Buddhism and philosophy is around this kind of idea. Now, some people may say 8 hours sleep per day is necessary for health. Some people may say, I need to be wealthy. Being wealthy makes me happy. Some people may say being healthy makes me happy. Some people may say computer games are bad for you. Other people will say computer games are good for you. So you'll see that with all these different examples, it gets more and more, can be very, very complicated because these are ideas based on our experiences. And it can conflict. Some people will have bad experiences. So for example, if every time you bite into an apple there's a worm, you're going to say, forget it, apples are bad. I don't like apples. Right? How many people have actually bitten an apple and saw a worm? I've seen it. Right? It's terrifying. As a kid, I saw my dad, he bit into it and he spit it out. Oh, there's a worm. Like, no, I'm not eat apples again. Okay? It took me 10 years to finally eat apples again. Okay? Because apples was bad for a while. Forget it, I ain't touching it. Then I learned, okay, I have to cut it up and make sure there's no worms, then I can eat it. So you get a little bit smarter. But as layers get more complicated, they get further and further removed from the basic perceptions or the basic perceptual layers. And when that happens, it becomes more and more abstract. So yet another type of perceptual layer is abstract perceptual layers. This is very important because when we can identify things as being abstract, then that means more than likely someone who thinks about the same idea will understand it completely differently. That's what it means. So a lot of arguments that we see, whether it's online, on news, between politics, people are arguing about this, seems to be about the same thing, but underneath those perceptual layers, completely different. Now, I want to put together, let's talk about a specific example because this one, I love to use this example every single time we talk about abstract perceptual layers. Let's take an idea of an honest person. Ask yourself right now, are you an honest person? I'll give you 15 seconds to think about it. Okay, so I think most people will say, I'm an honest person. Right? At least I hope so. Right? But it seems so black and white, but maybe it's not. So the questions I have for you is, have you ever told a lie? You must have. All right? We learn from telling a lie when we were a kid. Oh, that's bad, slap. Okay, don't do it again. Or maybe socially you don't get accepted, etc., etc. Right? So if you've told a lie before, are you still an honest person since you have lied? Or put it another way, have you said something that wasn't true, either to yourself or to somebody? How recent was that? Was that 5 years ago? Last year? Last week? How does that factor in to this abstract perceptual layer called honesty? Are you still honest? Yes?
So I have a question for you. So my friend says to me, do I look fat in this dress? Do I say yes, or do I choose the kind answer?
Okay.
So then you have to balance honesty with kindness.
Okay. So for those on, I don't know, people on Zoom, did you guys hear that on Zoom? Yeah, you did. Okay, very good. I'm not going to answer that question. So that is based on personal experience. You have to decide. All right, so this question is more about, are you actually an honest person, not whether you should be an honest person. So if you told a lie last week, are you still honest? Now, if you decide that from now on, you're not going to tell a lie, does that make you an honest person? So in other words, it's not a clear answer. So if you're talking about honesty, then it's easy to get confused. Now, it's easy to get confused for yourself because the idea of honesty can change and is pretty loose. It's a pretty loose definition. Some people will really hold on to honesty like a virtue. I must always be honest. Right? So I'm going to tell my friend, yes, you're fat, and make her cry, him or cry. All right? And then you have to pay the price for it. Maybe you lose your friend. I don't know, but you're being honest. You know, are you a better friend by not telling the truth? So these are the things that you have to decide what is the best course of action for yourself. Nobody can really tell you. So, but the point here is to try to understand what your abstract perceptual layers are and to challenge them once in a while and not accept it as fact. I'll bring in some, because Igor mentioned this, some other philosophical ideas. So if anybody studied Buddhism or some other ideas, you may have come across the word attachment. So people say, oh, don't be so attached to these ideas. What they're saying is that don't have such a stubborn mind. Look at your perceptual layers. Are they still valid? Does it still make sense? Can you see a way in which maybe that perceptual layer is no longer valid? Maybe you want to change the way that you think about things. So that's what it means. Or one aspect of the idea of attachment is to consider your perceptual layers in this way. Of course, there's many, many other teachings, some which we will come around to eventually one of these days. We're going to take another break. This time, I want you to think about an abstract layer and follow it through. If it's like a fifth level, try to follow it all the way down to the first level of your basic sense perceptions and also the evaluative perceptual layers. Try to get to that point. It's an exercise to help you to not have this stubborn mind, not to be so attached to your ideas, to give yourself room and the possibility that you can modify them and update your perceptual layers. Otherwise, your thinking becomes stuck in one direction and it's like closing off your opportunity in life. Everything gets more and more narrow and then suddenly you only have one way to go. So it gives you more flexibility way of thinking. 5-minute break, and then we will continue with the last meditation session, and then a very, very short philosophy when I'll give you the final conclusion. All right, so if any questions, feel free to ask. Yes?
When you read about the concept of truth, I'm thinking about evaluative layers of perception, and I'm wondering about all of the people who say there is an objective truth and there isn't objective truth, and how does that fit into our evaluations? Like, is there such a thing?
Okay, so the question for those on Zoom, and just to paraphrase, does the perceptual layer or the idea of truth really exist? And how should we perceive it? Yeah. So in one of the most basic teaching is to let go of such ideas. Because in truth, there's not much meaning to it. Some people will say, for example, previously I would have talked about the Four Noble Truths because it's a common idea. And it's called the Four Noble Truths because, which are that there is suffering in the world. It comes from the desire, and it comes from the idea that we exist. And then the fourth one is that we can absolve ourselves of suffering if we get rid of the idea of ourself. So those are Four Noble Truths. And I bring this example because I teach it a lot. And in these Four Noble Truths, you can apply it to your reality and see that it does exist around you each and every single time. So therefore, it becomes a truth. Rather than looking as a black and white truth, something that is always true, I prefer to keep my perceptual layers fairly loose so that I'm always testing my understanding of things. And this is how I come up with all the stuff I come up with and how I develop the Shaolin Kung Fu and all the programming and everything. And it's because I'm always looking at things from the scratch and rebuilding my understanding of things. Why I suggest this is that your mind, if it's loosely developed like this, it's the most powerful. It's like water, all right? It's got the most power. It's malleable. It can move around as you like, but it's solid. Like you can't. If you put water in a container, press down on it, you can't press down on it at all. It's not going to move anywhere. But yet you can spill the water and move it, swoosh it around as you like. So this makes you more adaptable and allows you to constantly adapt to your environment, whether it's a social environment, actually almost always a social environment, but even your interaction with the world and the way that you think, it's always changing, and you get comfortable with that. For some people, and this may be a lot of people in this room or online, the idea that your perceptions can be changed can be scary. It's like pulling the floor, like a rug, from your feet. And you can get emotional. So if you're starting to feel emotional, I apologize. So just try to breathe and relax and not to get too caught up in the things that I say. But it means that your mind is very stubborn. It's very fixed on these perceptual layers. You're not giving yourself freedom to think in different ways. So, and that also means probably you don't have a very good understanding of yourself. So that's why you get scared very fast. One of the upcoming workshops, possibly by end of this year, is to talk about this. How do we go about challenging our perceptual layers in a very safe way so that we can build up this like a liquid mind and is constantly adapting. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You're clear about how you evaluated a particular situation and then how you react or act or say things accordingly. Was it proper? You'll know immediately. And you'll be able to learn from your environment, keep adapting and changing the way you think constantly as a result. Okay, so hopefully I answered that question. So when the question was that you built up the Apple sense perception hierarchy, going the other way to subtler levels, what do you find? Okay, I'm not entirely sure what that question is because in terms of the perceptual layers of the building up to the apple, we talked about fruits and.
Can you split the sour?
So is that?
Can you split the sour? Can you split the juicy?
Yes. Yeah, you can keep on splitting. If you're going back downwards, each layer can constantly. Okay, so thank you. So if that's the question, our perceptual layers and you will, as you experience life, continue to refine more and more perceptual layers. And that's part of the experience of life. And that's what, for me, makes life so interesting, is to see that. So like food, for example, if it's just sweet to you, it's not so interesting. It's just sweet. But there's different degrees of sweetness. There's a little bit sweet and there's extreme sweetness. But then there's sweetness associated with like a flavor like chocolate. It completely changes things. So you end up with like essentially infinite number of perceptual layers, and then to explore all that. Wow, it's so fascinating. So you'll see people who are really well practiced go, oh, life is so interesting. Oh, this taste is so interesting of this sandwich when I bit into it. Because wow, all these explosion of perceptual layers just came into mind.
Into wines, right?
And you're like, wines, because it's another good example. Yes.
I can hear the somebody else.
Very good. All right, and that's our break time, which means we go through another 20 minutes of meditation. But because of time, we're going to shorten down to 10 minutes. I can finally bring back the cabbage brain idea that I really love to use. So as we're talking about these layers, we build them up. And we said that with these abstract perceptual layers, it allows us to make quick decisions and judgments. However, we're not necessarily observing what's below. So like that of imagine your brain's like a cabbage, you got these layers. So in a way, your mind is always on the external. You don't know what's inside. And the main purpose of this is to always keep checking, because sometimes there may be layers that are conflicting. For example, you may say to yourself, honest, but you told a lie yesterday. Meanwhile, someone who just told a lie yesterday, you call them dishonest. So that's how it works. You get confused very, very quickly. And when we develop more awareness of our perceptual layers, it changes the way that we interact with our environment. We get a better understanding of the motivations behind the things that we do, the things that we say, our actions, even our thoughts are all part of this. It's directly related to our perceptual layers. So if you have never looked inside your cabbage brain, then chances are you're more confused than you really need to be. The more time you spend with introspection, looking into your brain and these perceptual layers, the less confused of a person that you will be, and the more clear that things will become for you. So for me, the power of clarity means that exactly like this, you can see things clearly as they are. And as I mentioned earlier, life gets really exciting. I find everything fascinating. Even from the clothing that I wear, it's not just clothing. It's like, whoa, all the process that went up, all the manpower from collecting the material and then sewing it together. And it's this incredible process. That's fascinating. And if I keep looking at life that way, then, whoa, it's always so interesting. Otherwise, it's just a piece of clothing. So that's the difference. Right? Really, the ability to develop clarity requires a lot of work. So that means you have to keep working at it. You have to persevere. You must strive, and you must stay focused on this. So in other words, you need to embody what I call the spirit of the Shaolin warrior. So my final remark then is this, that clearly the study of perceptions is not complete without an understanding of emotions, which is what we will be doing at the next workshop. But consider that a dictionary is full of words that are also basically perceptual layers. That's what they are. And there's actually wisdom built into the dictionary itself. So when you are looking for answers, start with the dictionary. 文笔托福. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I've got about 5 minutes. Yes, Rose.
师傅, would you say that it would be a wise practice to consider that people's ideas, for example, what suffering is, could be different from case to case? So what you consider to be suffering could be somebody else's bliss. So we cannot assume that there's a consensus as to what suffering is, and therefore our interactions with people are like almost like a case-by-case understanding of that concept.
Yes. Okay.
Practice that.
So the question was that do people have different interpretation or perceptual layer of understanding of the idea of suffering? And if so, do we have to deal with people on a case-by-case basis? So let me share with you an experience. When I went to India many years ago, I traveled around for about a month in southeastern India to a city called Chennai. And there I spent time with the richest people and also the poorest people. And I'm saying poor, and I'm talking about people on the beach where they have these little huts. They don't even have washrooms or anything. Their washroom is actually the ocean. And they live in little shacks that just makeshift shacks with whatever they can find. Some piece of metal, maybe some cardboard, like whatever it is. And as it's 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm talking to the fishermen as they're coming back. And I'm talking to them, and I can see that they're actually really happy. They're actually not suffering. Meanwhile, when I spent some time with one of the main importers of oil in that region. He's so wealthy. That's a story for another time. But he is, his concept of happiness or suffering is completely different. He's bored out of his mind. He's looking for things to do. He's suffering with boredom because he has everything he needs physically in the world. So he has many other emotions that is causing him suffering. Now, if you ask that person what he thought about the poor person on the beach, he'll say, oh, these people are suffering. But if you ask those people on the beach, they're not suffering. They're actually really happy. They have little families in town in the hut. They have their way of living. It's what they know. So their happiness comes from sharing moments of life together. And when they do that, they don't suffer with boredom. They appreciate the life. They see the more simplicity. Actually, you can even say chances are that they are closer to the sense perceptions layer. Because they're always fascinated by the things, even little things around them. That's what's so interesting for them. So the way they suffer, probably very, very different. Now, if they're hungry a little bit, it's not suffering for them. It's normal. For us, if they're even a little bit hungry, oh, we're suffering. Oh, no, I'm so hungry, right? I haven't eaten in 6 hours. Oh, no. So very, very different. So that's why when you deal with people and you see that they're suffering, don't necessarily think that they're suffering. Just ask them the questions. How are you feeling? Oh, why are you feeling that way? Can I help you in some way? Because maybe they're not suffering in that way that you think. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, you're welcome, Jenny. Hope everyone had a really good time and some useful thoughts. But if you leave today and you don't think about this topic, then you will have already forgotten. You're back into your cabbage brain, into a black abyss inside. So you need to think about it. And I will make this workshop, the video, available, and it will also be in written form. Actually, it's already available as of 1 minute from now. You can go online and see it, because I timed it that way. I might make some small, minor adjustments to it, but there will be a video blog because some things that we talked about and the way we talked about it is a little bit different here in the workshop. Okay, so have a wonderful evening. Until next time.